Welcome to the Winter 2021 English Reading Series. This is our 21st year of the series and our penultimate reading of the semester. We are thrilled to have Emily Ruskovich with us today. Thank you all for joining us. The English Reading Series is sponsored by the Department of English and the College of Humanities with help from Rebecca Kazanavi, Robert Means, and our friends at the library. We will start today with a prayer by Soraya Roosh. Following the prayer, Dallin Hunt will offer an introduction. As a reminder, we will drop a purchase link to Emily's novel, Idaho, in the chat window, so please be on the lookout for that. Also, please join us next week for our semester finale, the Paxman Student Reading. Soraya, when you're ready.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you that we could all gather here together to celebrate the writings of Emily Ruskovich and to listen to her and learn. Please bless that we can listen with open ears, and thank you that we have the opportunity to gather together as those who love English. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Emily Ruskovich graduated with her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and currently teaches creative writing at Boise State University. Her debut novel, Idaho, won the International Dublin Literary Award and was a finalist for the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best First Novel. Ruskovich is also a winner of an O. Henry Award, the Idaho Book Award, and a Pacific Northwest Book Award. Idaho has received a great deal of praise, and one of my favorite tidbits from a review was written by Hannah Tinty, and it reads as follows. Idaho is a novel written like music, striking arpeggios, haunting refrains, and then you come to a bridge and Ruskovich leads you up into the mountains, introducing a chorus of rich and beautiful voices woven deep in the Idaho woods. So I jumped at the opportunity to introduce Ruskovich today. I read Idaho and I was just absolutely taken with the haunting and gorgeous description of the northern Idaho region, as well as the way her work resists glossing over or sensationalizing the violence and trauma that it explores, but rather digs deeply with honesty and immense compassion, finding seemingly unattainable glimmers of hope and redemption. Please welcome Emily Ruskovich.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for hosting me. It's a real pleasure to be able to read to you today. Thanks for the lovely introduction and the beautiful prayer. I only wish that I could be there with all of you in person, but this is very special to me, so thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to read 5 brief passages from different places in the novel, and I'll just give a short synopsis first. Idaho is the story of a family living in the mountains of northern Idaho. There's a father, Wade, a mother, Jenny, and 2 little girls, May and June. And one horrific day, this family is destroyed for no reason at all. It's a completely mystifying event that occurs, and in which one of the children is killed and the other one goes missing. And the daughter who is killed by her otherwise very loving mother. So most of the novel this all happens in the past. Most of the novel takes place years and years later, after Wade, the only one remaining in this family after such a tragedy, remarries, and he marries a woman named Anne, who's a very kind and searching woman, and she's trying to hold on to Wade's past, even as it's a very devastating past, because he's losing these memories to early onset Alzheimer's disease. So the first passage that I'm going to read is from the very start of the novel. This is in 2004. They never drove the truck except once or twice a year to get firewood. It was parked just up the hill in front of the woodshed, where it collected rain in the deep dents on the hood and mosquito larvae in the rainwater. That was the way it was when Wade was married to Jenny, and that's the way it is now that he is married to Anne. Anne goes up there sometimes to sit in the truck. She waits until Wade is busy so that he won't notice that she's gone. Today she comes here under the pretense of getting firewood, dragging a blue sled over the mud and grass and patches of snow. The woodshed isn't far from the house, but it's hidden from view by a stand of ponderosa pines. She feels like she is trespassing, like none of this is hers to see. The truck is parked on a rare space of flat land, an unlikely shelf carved into the mountainside. In front of the woodshed, around the truck, a few loose bricks lie here and there in the grass and snow. Spindles of mangled wire lean against the trees. Hanging from a long larch limb are two thick ropes that sway opposite each other now, but look as if they might have once been connected by a flat board, a child's swing. It is March, sunny and cold. Anne gets into the driver's seat and shuts the door quietly. She pulls the seatbelt across her body, then rolls the window down so that several droplets splatter on her lap. She touches the wet spots with her fingertip, connecting them with lines in her mind to make a picture on her thigh. The picture reminds her of a mouse, or at least a child's drawing of a mouse with a triangle face and a long curly-cued tail. 9 years ago, when Wade was still married to Jenny and both of his daughters were still alive, a mouse had crawled along the top of the truck's exhaust pipe into the engine compartment and built its nest on the manifold. She thinks of how strange it is that Wade probably remembers that mouse, remembers the sound of it skittering under the hood, and yet he's forgotten his first wife's name. Or so it seems sometimes. But the mouse is still very much alive in his memory. A few years after Anne and Wade married, Anne found a pair of deerskin gloves in a toolbox high on a shelf in a closet. They were much nicer than the work gloves Wade usually wore and seemed to be brand new except for the odor of something burned. That was how she learned about the mouse in the first place. She asked why he kept the gloves stored in their closet instead of using them. Wade told her that he wanted to preserve the smell. What smell is that? The smell of a rodent's nest caught on fire, the last smell in his daughter's hair. It was a long time ago now that he said things like that. He stopped talking about the details of his daughter's death once he saw how much Anne held on to them. He probably thinks she's forgotten about the gloves, it's been so many years, but she hasn't. He keeps them in the filing cabinet with his papers in his office upstairs. She has opened the drawer just enough to see them. That mouse had probably been in the truck the whole winter during that last year that Wade was married to Jenny, that last year that May was alive and June was safe. Anne thinks of the mouse going back and forth in the snow between the truck and barn, hauling mouthfuls of hay or insulation or tufts of stuffing from the dog's bed, making its nest bigger and having babies in it once spring arrived. Some of the babies probably died early on and were absorbed by the nest, their tiny bones like shards of straw themselves. And other mice came too. You could hear them moving under the hood if you put your ear against it. The little girls liked doing that. Well, at least Anne imagines they did. One day in August, the whole family got into the truck. Wade at the steering wheel where Anne is sitting now, Jenny next to him, their daughters, June and May, 9 and 6, crammed in back with a jug of lemonade and styrofoam cups, which they carved pictures into with their fingernails. The girls probably wanted to ride in the truck bed, but their mother would have said it was not safe on the highway. So they sat facing each other in the cab with their backs against the windows, bumping their knees, probably fighting. They forgot all about the mice. They didn't notice anything at first, driving slowly over the dirt roads. But once they reached the highway in their town of Ponderosa, a smell like decay and burning hair, skin and seeds sizzling on a hot engine, entered through the vent and filled the whole cab of the truck until the little girls were gagging and laughing and pushing their freckled noses out their windows. They had to drive on with their windows down, tolerating the smell for the half-hour drive through the Nez Valley, past Athol and Kerrywood, then up the long road nearly to the top of the wheel, the mountain where the birch wood was already cut and piled, ready to be loaded. Their hair and clothes, and Wade's gloves, held the burned smell in their fibers. Anne pictures June and May. They wait in the sun while their mother rolls the birch logs onto the truck bed, and their father stacks them there. The girls lean against the tires, slapping horseflies on their legs, pouring lemonade into the dust. The smell would have been there on the way back, too. It is the one constant. It connects two things in Anne's mind that she can't manage to connect otherwise: the drive up the mountain and the drive back down. The drive back down is the part Anne comes here to try to understand. There would have been things Wade had to consider before he could take control and go for help. Practical things, shutting the tailgate, for example, so the logs wouldn't roll out. He would have had to remember to hold the handle up and then push in. There was a trick to it, in order to lock the tailgate. That he would remember, that his fingers could do what they were supposed to do even in the midst of his horror. has something to do with the reason Anne loves him. One day, perhaps, everything will be gone from his mind except the trick of the tailgate latch, and Anne will love him still. She thinks of how easy it would have been to get lost on the way back down, since they'd gotten lost so badly on the way up. How could anything have looked familiar? The narrow, grassy roads, the crudely made road signs nailed to trees, that he had read them an hour before seemed impossible to her. All of it seemed impossible. The summer sky, the snapping of twigs under the truck's tires, the smell of grease and honeysuckle, Jenny's breath fogging the window. Anne has had to imagine most of it, everything beyond the facts Wade told her or she heard on TV. She did try very hard during those early days to keep the radio and TV off, so that everything she knew from Wade. What Wade wanted to tell her she would keep, but she wouldn't let herself go searching. She wouldn't let herself ask. But all of that is different now that Wade is forgetting. She wants to ask him if he and Jenny spoke before his memory is lost for good. Did Jenny look out the side window or straight ahead? Or did she look at him? At what point did he rip down the rearview mirror? No, Anne thinks, it isn't even the drive back. It is his getting into the truck at all, opening the door and getting in. Jenny there with a cup of lemonade shaking in her hand. Or maybe not shaking, maybe perfectly still. Maybe the cup empty. Maybe the droplets of lemonade spilled on her lap like the droplets of water now on Anne's thigh, in the shape of something harmless, something that the child in the back seat might have drawn. Anne runs her hand over the dashboard and the soft, moist pollen of last summer sticks to her palm. It is all put together for her here. The rearview mirror is up again, glued in place, and there's a dream catcher thrown around it with 2 fluorescent feathers hanging down. The carpet has been shampooed, the right back seat replaced entirely, with one that looks like the original on the left, only a brighter shade of blue, and missing the little holes where the stuffing came out, and where the girls might have once stuck their fingers. Anne turns the key to let the engine run while she sits here. She breathes deeply. 9 years and the smell of the mouse's nest is gone, but every now and then, when she shifts in the driver's seat and the dust rises from the cushion, she catches what might be the hint of that old smell, distant and thinly sweet, leather and burning grass. Though, of course, it could also be the controlled spring fires down in the valley fields, far away. Anne has seen 2 pictures of his younger daughter, May. The first was on TV. The second, a Polaroid, she brought out from under the refrigerator with her broom 5 years ago. She picked it up out of the dust and hair, and there was something sticky on its surface that when she scratched it came off in tiny red peels like dry jam. In the picture, May held a cloth doll that looked just like her. Blonde, straight bangs, hair cut to her chin, popsicle, bright lips. She wore a swimming suit top and skirted bloomers, and there were cat scratches across her round white belly. She sat on a tall stump in a clearing in the woods with her chubby legs crossed in a perfect mimicry of maturity, her pink sandals fallen in the dust. May wasn't smiling, though she was well aware that the picture was being taken. Instead, she looked down dramatically with her eyes fluttered closed, holding her doll loosely away from her, but also against, as if she were about to passionately kiss its dirty cloth face. Her head was tilted to the side and her lips were parted. Her bangs swept just slightly over her eye, and she faced the doll and not the camera, touching the little pink thread of a mouth with her cautious finger like a lover. She looked maybe 5 or 6 years old, full of passion and feeling beautiful. It is this May whom Anne pictures sitting in the back seat of the truck 9 years ago on that August day. In the scene Anne sees in her mind, May feels personally slighted by the horseflies that bite her arms. She has crawled into the back seat of the truck, but the flies have followed her from the outside. Her mom and dad are still loading wood. Her older sister is in the forest somewhere. May is pouting, her lips kissing with small bites on her white skin, murmuring as they kiss, as if they're the lips of someone else, consoling her, touching her, telling the bites to go away. As the flies land, she slaps them. Her handprints are bright on her skin. At first, she tries to capture the flies in the styrofoam cup she has for lemonade, but there are too many. The flies learn her rhythms and try to trick her, landing in places that are difficult to slap, like the back of her neck, where she can hardly feel them on her downy hair. The buzzing around her head is as infuriating as the stings themselves. They are equally in peril. The flies of her vicious little hands and she of their bites, each one a surprising pinprick of pain that makes the skin on her whole body tighten. It is a maddening game that they are playing, full of anticipation, tension, dares. Anne sees May, sitting with her hand perfectly still in midair, waiting for the fly to trust her so she can kill it. And then there is a black stop in Anne's mind, as if her eyes have shut suddenly after looking at the sun and the last outlines of color are swimming in the darkness under her lids. The buzz of the flies, the sound of someone running, the half-hearted clucks of bored crows in the mountain woods, all of it reduces to a crackling static in a darkness. When Anne's mind opens up again like an eye, what is most startling is how peaceful the scene has become. May, in the back seat, sits with her head down on her knees, perfectly still. The horseflies land on her arms now that her hands aren't slapping anymore. Her blood is sticky and warm in her hair. The buzzing quiets, and the flies settle on her arms almost tenderly, like children sick of fighting and ready for sleep. Some of them are not sure the game is over, that it isn't a childish trick, and her hands, so quiet now, won't suddenly tense and fly to life. These flies rise again and buzz and bounce against the window, and then land somewhere else. But eventually they settle down too. Settle down so much that they stop biting and rest on our still arms like those arms are home, washing their antennae, letting the hundreds of facets of their eyes go out of focus for a while, as the dense yellow light through the window penetrates the fractured panels of their wings and warms them in these moments when everything is safe. This next part is just a couple pages long. It's the first chapter from Elizabeth's point of view, and Elizabeth is Jenny's cellmate in prison. Jenny is the mother who killed her daughter, so she's serving a life sentence in prison. So this is from Elizabeth's point of view, 2008. Plastic flowers in a plastic vase, a nightstand bolted to the floor, Elizabeth's awake. Hatred, forgotten in her sleep, arrives in her stomach at the sight of those flowers, which are not for her, but are striving to seem to be. They've been placed here in the prison infirmary in order to create the illusion of a worried family as a way of coaxing a patient back into the world, even though their petals are cobwebbed, and God knows how many prisoners have died in this bed after suicides that didn't take until hours later, right at the moment suicide was no longer necessary because, look, someone sent flowers. The flowers reek with all that stale time and pretense. She might throw up. She has been in the infirmary for almost a week for stomach cramps, the result of grief. She hasn't been able to hold down her food ever since the guards informed her that she wouldn't be allowed, not ever in the 2 lifetimes she owed, to attend the prison school that has been her only sanctuary here these 16 years. A month in lock should have sufficed for her infraction, but no, that hideous month when she crouched in the agony of unremitting light, when she sucked now and then the leather corner of a Bible, wasn't enough. So they took away her education too. Elizabeth will pay for her one offense forever, all the rest of her 2 trapped lives. The classroom, forbidden to her now, is the only tolerable place in this whole prison, the only place that actually resembles her old life, unlike those flowers, those pathetic intimations. A footstep. Elizabeth lies dead still with her eyes shut. Rigid in the bed, she hopes she hasn't already been caught awake. She has a new cellmate now, Jenny, and she knows that's who it is, that's who's shifting in this room. They lived together for only a week before Elizabeth collapsed, but she can picture Jenny perfectly now. Hands clasped, her patience like a sickness the way it encompasses her, hair ragged and graying, hands ruined by chemicals, her face eerily pretty. Why does she keep coming? Their sentences have overlapped by 13 years in this small prison, and yet the only words that have ever passed between them are, "You live here now," and "yes," spoken in the cell 2 weeks ago, the day that Elizabeth was released from lock to find that Jenny had moved in. Elizabeth had heard about Jenny's long-suffering silence, and she had seen the way Jenny scrubbed the hallways, making a display of her submission to misery. What a thing to look forward to living with. Why has she come here to visit? Why, when they are nothing to each other but bodies forced to share a space? Another footstep, another. It's only a nurse walking by. Elizabeth opens her eyes. No one's here. She rolls over, clutches her stomach. She would almost rather Jenny's vacant presence than her hovering absence here in this half room with curtained walls. Jenny's absence seems to describe her better than her presence does. She is a looming vessel of her own withholding. Elizabeth had noticed that quality in her long before they were cellmates. She wants nothing, she prefers nothing, she's never complained. She's hardly said anything at all to anyone in all these years. So why hover here when she's not here? Sleep, Elizabeth, go to sleep. It doesn't matter. Sickness can spin a trivial in nauseating spirals. The most intolerable boredoms become infected with importance when you are sick. Like the flowers, why direct such fury at them? They are pieces of plastic. They have no intention of their own. And Jenny is only silent because she has nothing to say. And she came to visit you in the infirmary only because it was something to do. And besides, it was only once while you were pretending to sleep days ago. No, Jenny is not a mystery. There was a time early on when Elizabeth might have watched her with a secret fascination because of what she'd done. She might have even pictured Jenny in the front seat of that truck, would have seen every time she looked at her ordinary face, a different face, the same face, but right before and then right after. Elizabeth would have sought out her own disgust by doing so, and the disgust would have meant something promising about who she was. But that was long ago. She has long since lost interest in motives and the details of other women's crimes. Even the hatchet makes its usual sense. A mother who loves her child with all herself is only so far from the hatchet anyway. One casual swing and it's done. Hatred, love, all muddled up in that space inside a whisper when the words don't matter anymore, when the baby's half asleep and you can carry it all the way there if you want, on nothing but the tone of your voice. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. Sing it as softly as you like. The words clench their own teeth. The child still falls. But then again, Elizabeth thinks, in some conscious place inside her dream, inside her sedative in the dusty smell of plastic flowers, there was something once that Jenny wanted. 3 or 4 years ago, there was a vote. One of the prisoners had a brother who wanted to donate a piano. The warden showed the prisoners the space in the common room the piano would occupy. Is this what you want? The warden asked. A rare thing to see the warden, a stocky woman with a square, pleasant face, but an even rarer thing to vote. Elizabeth wondered why this, of all things, was a question worth asking. Why wouldn't they take what they could get? The warden said, all in favor? And every hand but one went up. The warden said, all against? And there was Jenny's hand. Strange, so very strange to remember it now. Jenny's hand in the air seemed then the first and only word that she had ever spoken, hovering above them all, out of place, absurd. She had lived alone for so long that speaking seemed to hurt her body. So it was strange to think that there could be anything that Jenny wanted or didn't want, strange to see in her after all those years some semblance of opinion, a quiet but active will. Her hand, the only one, rising as if astonished at its rising. This next brief passage takes place much later in the book, about halfway through, and this is after Wade's disease has progressed to the point that he has not only forgotten that his daughters have died, but he's forgotten that he ever had daughters. And so inside of this disease, he has asked Anne if she wants to have a baby with him. And so the passage that I'm going to read follows that scene. Anne is playing the piano and she's thinking about it. Anne, waiting for her piano student one winter afternoon, sings as she plays. Take your picture off the wall and carry it away. Dye your hair the shades of fall. Don't let time turn it to gray. The melody is simple, but she has improvised complications. It is the song that has been caught in her life all these years, the song whose simplicity carries with it endless questions, unspoken feelings. Wade is in his workshop, so he can't hear. He hasn't heard the song since their early courtship. Her fingers move swiftly without her, disconnected, freed. She can't think of a note or else she will lose the music from her hands, the music that is not a memory any longer, but a feeling in her fingertips, a presence inside of her that can't be watched or else it disappears. Don't think of me, I'll be all right. Seems I've always done okay. Give me one last kiss goodnight and for the last time turn away. As she sings, she thinks of Wade. He has lost his daughters, but he has also lost the memory of losing them. But he has not lost the loss. Pain is as present in his body as his signature is in his hand. He can sign his name perfectly, but he can't print it. W, he tries. But the A is impossible without the cursive tilt, the remembered motion of the letter before. He knows only his name, but can't see, can't feel the separate parts, which are only possible from the inertia of his hand. He knows his grief too, but its source is also lost without its movement. It is a static thing, unrecognizable, disconnected. And so he confuses his grief with the want of something he doesn't know he's had before, a baby. He wants to know what it's like to hold his own in his arms. He wants to know what it's like to be a father, what it is like, not what it was. He believes he lacks the experience, as if he's simply waited too long to want a child and hasn't wanted it hard enough. He blames himself. He blames her. Though neither one of them has mentioned it since that day on the river, At times she feels his blame or coolness. A couple of times he has mentioned how nice it would be to have a boy, but their window of time is closing, and he seems to feel the weight of his life pressing down. When you love someone who has died and her death disappears because you can't remember it, what you are left with is merely the pain of something unrequited. Anne knows that in the stiller moments, he searches for the source of the pain. He looks for it in Anne. He looks for it in the mountain. Somewhere, love is not returned, and it hurts him like heartbreak does. He holds Anne in his sleep, but it is not her he holds, but the phantom hope, the baby between them, never to be born, never to be lost or yearned for or forgotten and wanted again. Perhaps it would be less painful to remember his daughters than to believe he could have his daughters, but has waited too long to want them. Maybe it is better for him to know that he has held them before, that he has loved them in the way he wants to love. From another chapter, this is May 2025, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I don't know if I need to fill you in. There was a long time ago that Anne tried to find out what Idaho meant. There wasn't an easy answer. The history was so intricate and poorly recorded. It seemed at first to be the Shoshone word for the way the rising sun moves downward along the edge of a mountain. But reading deeper into that history, she found out it was a lie. There was no word like Idaho in any native language. It did not mean, as so many sources claimed, gem of the mountains. The real story seemed instead to be about a miner, a delegate to Congress. He was playing with a little girl in the house chamber of the nation's capital. She was the daughter of a friend of his, a little girl named Ida. She wasn't supposed to be there in the house chamber, but she was, playing with this man, a stranger to her, while discussions went on around them about the name of a proposed state. When suddenly she ran away from him, toward the door that led to the halls of Congress, he called out to her, "Ida, ho, come back to me, come back to me." When the other delegates heard his exclamation, they asked him where he learned such a beautiful word. They did not understand his shout was meant for a little girl no longer there, a little girl they hadn't noticed. They thought that he had been overcome with inspiration for a name. A sentimental man, he replied that it was the only word worthy of such a rugged land, and in an instant he made up a story. He told them he had heard the Shoshone chant the word at dawn. He told them it was how the Shoshone described the rising sun, the gem of the mountains. Congress was moved. By a landslide vote, the territory was to become, with Denver at its center, the state of Idaho. But just before statehood was official, the man's lie was found out. Disappointed and embarrassed at having nearly named a state after nothing, after a little girl, Congress swiftly changed the name to Colorado. But Idaho did not die. The miner brought it into the mines with him. He repeated the word and its false meaning again and again. The sound was so magnetic it took hold. People began to believe they themselves had heard the Shoshone's chant. The word moved north, it moved west. It appeared on the side of a steamboat traveling down the Columbia River. The vision of this steamer, with the Shoshone word painted in white on its side, caught on the hearts of the people on the shore. They remembered it. A trail of impressions followed through like a line of unconscious music. It is no wonder someone thought to give this meaningful name to a child. Because before long, another little girl was born, named for what her parents thought was the Shoshone word for the rising sun, but was really just the name of another little girl, a child by now long forgotten. It was the second child's aunt, an important woman, who brought the word to Congress and requested a new territory, be named for her newborn niece, a little girl named Idaho. So, a state named after a little girl, named after another little girl. Follow the trail and that's what you find, a girl, a lie, a steamboat, then another little girl, and then this land. Come back to me. Meaning is like music. It catches and is carried, it returns, refrains, phrases, the names of passing boats. Stuck in my head, it's stuck in my head. The way stories fasten themselves to words, words fasten themselves to vulnerable rhythms, impressionable tunes. Anne is skilled in the archaeology of carried music. It holds on like fear, like love. Take your picture off the wall and carry it away. Dye your hair the shades of fall. Don't let time turn it to gray. In a few hours, someone will come to tow the truck away. In a few months, Anne will leave Idaho forever. The Idaho she'd once forgotten, the Idaho for which she'd longed. And this final passage that I'll read is the most experimental passage in the book. It's told from the point of view of a bloodhound searching for a missing child. The loose skin of a bloodhound is meant to hold the ground. The ears that drag along the forest floors send the scent up to the skin, where, trapped within the wrinkles and folds, it reminds the hound what the trail is, even when the trail is lost. The smell of the trail becomes the smell of himself, trapped between the wrinkles of the neck and all around the eyes, which require an effort to raise under all that skin. Head down, whatever the dog follows, he follows blind. Gravity heaps the forehead down to the top of the snout, so that the scent between the wrinkles is more of a means of seeing than the eyes the wrinkles cover. The heavy ears flopping forward at all times create the walls of a trail, a kind of tunnel and tunnel vision, the tips of the ears stirring up the particles on the ground for the wrinkles to gather and hold. Off duty, head up, the bloodhound is a different dog. The wrinkles fall open, the forehead is smoothed, the scent let go. This is how a dog forgets. This is how a dog moves on. He lifts his head. But there are so many footsteps, people. Everywhere the people are calling out the name of the trail, and he can hear the name even with his ears closed. It is dark. He knows that much at least, though it is dark always under the heaviness of his forehead. He smells the darkness in the men's sharp breaths as they go calling, not for him, but for whatever he is after. The smell inside a glove, the smell that is 1,000 smells of leather, mice and water, fire, hands and feet, and the confusion of other dogs that ran this trail hours before. The heat of rubber tires, engine stops, clothing, boots, mud that is not from the forest, caked and carried in the traction of the people's shoes from other places, farms, sidewalks, mowed grass, and the fresh deer pellets that get stuck too, the smells crushed open, ruptured between the rubber and the ground. He bores this tunnel through the thicket of smells. The bear a week ago, musk trapped in the mats of his fur, broken open by the trunk he rubbed against. The pine whose bark a day ago was peeled off by sour teeth smelling of digested grass and fear and even stone. Thrown fragments of foam from being startled, rabbits too. He smells the newborn rabbits underground, where the afterbirth has dried in the eroded dirty fur, some just born, some old enough to have returned wounded, the blood already licked up off the pine needles by coyote tongues rancid and smelling of starvation. Or other dogs, not on a hunt, but with hay in their fur and the insides of houses, digging half-heartedly with their pungent snouts in piles of scat sweetened and bittered by post-frost elderberries the bears eat to sizzle and slime the tapeworms out of their intestines. And the soil itself, dry, splattered here and there with urine, human and animal, and the streams shaken out of fur or off fingertips gummed with mud and sweat and something sickly artificial. And at times the undercurrent of exhaust, trucks, a chainsaw nearly gone now, antlers clashed against one another, a dull shredded smell, small flies, their crushed brains on human skin and underweeds, men's fear and cortisone, batteries shaken inside the lights they hold, a muted metallic buzz in his nose, tree bark cooling and crystallizing sap like honeycomb, honeycomb itself, beetles stirred, rubbing bushes of spoiled flowers, cooling weeds, a cat's breath on claws licked clean. And one man smells harder than the rest. The smell is a kind of staggering, dangerous, other people on his clothes, and the dog won't go near that man, though the man is trying hard to follow him closely, his desperation teeming, the smells of his anger and need waterfalling over his shoulders, out of his hands, out of his mouth, calling out its sour, hot odors. The man has been inside that glove, the glove that they've held over the snout, the mouth of the glove, the warmth of the glove, the sweat inside, the deer it was once the skin of. Inside that glove is the truck, which smelled like blood, but other things too, carried out on dirty, perfumed hair, on skin lashed open in cuts no thicker than threads, candied breath hot with salt and near vomit, but almost gone, evaporated, the bright zing smell of seeds burst open from pods grazed by a child's fingertips, or else by the leashes, whiskers, snouts of other hounds, whose heads so very long ago, hours maybe, have lifted, moved on to other trails. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. That was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I mention this every week, such as Zoom, but I wish you could hear the applause of the 100 plus people in attendance right now.
Oh, thanks so much.
All right, well, let's move into the Q&A. We'll start with a question from Anne. She said, I have two questions. First, I know your novel Idaho is set in northern Idaho, and I was wondering how much of the story's location and structure is based off of where you grew up. My second question is, when you start writing, how much research goes into your work, and what does that process look like?
Great. Thank you so much, Anne, for your questions. Uh, Idaho, as you may have guessed, is shaped very much by Idaho. That's a large reason why it's named as it is, because the place is inextricable from the story. I felt that this was a story that, though I hope it's a universal story of redemption and grief and hope in spite of horrific circumstances, that there is something very specific about the place in which it takes place. And that specificity is northern Idaho, a very, very strange and beautiful and often dangerous place full of secrets. And so my childhood, which was a beautiful childhood, I had a wonderful, wonderful childhood. My childhood is everywhere in this book. I've given the best moments of my life to these characters because they needed those best moments. These characters have a very different life than I had. They have a life of tragedy. And so I wanted to give them moments from my own childhood on this mountain that for me was a wonderful place of memories. And so, yes, the two are very tied together. As far as your other question about research, I don't research at all when I start writing. I mean, I think it would vary project to project. But with this novel, I just wrote from my heart, and I didn't care if I got things wrong. I knew that in the editing process, I could do a lot of research on things that I didn't know everything about. But I didn't really look up much at all, except to correct things later on. I eventually did some reading on women's prisons to, confirm things and correct things that I may have gotten wrong. And I did a little bit of research on Alzheimer's disease, but most of that was just my imagination of what the disease would be like. The most research that I did, and it was some of the most rigorous research I'd ever done in my life, was on the history of Idaho, which I read today. I was amazed to find that there wasn't really a history of Idaho, the name Idaho out there that was all in one place. It was a lot of different fragments of this larger story. And so my research pieced together all of these different moments from different, versions of what the story is. I think in textbooks it still says that Idaho is a Shoshone word for gem of the mountains, which is just not true. And so that research was done almost when the novel was already complete. And I was amazed to find in my research two little girls, since my novel is about two little girls who are gone. And so that was a real gift that research gave me. And a friend of mine had told me once that if you go looking hard enough for something, you're going to find it. If you imagine something deeply enough, you're going to get close to what is real. And I really treasure that, because I feel that's what happened when I researched the name of the state of Idaho. I never ever imagined I would find two little girls in that research, and I did. Yes, thank you so much for your question.
Wonderful. Alexa said, you described Anne as trying to hold on to Wade's past, despite how devastating it is. Can you speak to the role of memory in your writing and the value of recalling experiences, even negative ones?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. Thank you, Alexa. The book is all about memory. And I think what Anne is feeling is that though it would be less painful for Wade if his disease just took away these memories, of this family that he misses desperately, and this life that he lost, that in losing those memories, it's dishonoring the people who lived, because they live in a very remote part of the world, and Anne doesn't, Anne and Wade are sort of, they just have each other. They don't have like this big community to remember this family that was lost. It's really up to her now, and she never knew the little girls. It's up to her, and it's up to the woman in prison, Jenny, who has destroyed this family. They're the only ones who remember. And to think of May, this little girl who didn't get a chance to live her life, to think of her forgotten, it tears Anne apart. And so she she wants them remembered, even though it's a terrible memory, because she did have 6 years, and those 6 years were everything, and they shouldn't be forgotten. Um, so that's I think my own memories are everywhere, in this story, and I'm closest to June. I gave my childhood self to the character of June, who's not on the page very much, but she's the closest I ever came about writing about myself. And I just think memory is a gift that you can give to your characters, to make them real and to make you care about them the way you care about people in the world, in this world, not in the fictional world. Thanks so much for your question.
Thank you. Paul said, thanks so much for your reading and your time. I know that you grew up in Idaho and spent time at the writer's workshop, where besides the Prairie Lights bookshop, there are not many escapes from nature, which is a huge theme in your work. You have also mentioned that Idaho draws on your own childhood, and OWL also has connections to what you might know from your experiences as an Idahoan. My question is, do you feel most comfortable writing in settings that are similar to your own experience? And would you feel comfortable writing about urban and foreign settings? And what would be your advice to writers who do not have as much personal experience with the subject, i.e. city slickers talking about rural life and vice versa?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that before. I do feel uncomfortable writing about places that I've never been, but that doesn't mean I don't do it. I'm writing a story right now that takes place not in rural Idaho, not in a rural environment. Partially it does, but mostly in a college town, which is not a big city, but it's a town, which is a big step for me. And I think that, for those people who've never been in the mountains and want to write about, rural life, that you really just go there and learn how to see it, and I think you can walk on a mountain and not see anything at all, just the way you can walk through a city and not see anything at all. And I think just training your eye to see the smallest things, and to be and to acknowledge the different kinds of quiet, even, and just to open yourself to all the things that you can hear and see at once. I think it's just a matter of training your eye, and that you can train your eye to see in any environment, even those that you're least familiar with. And maybe especially then, I feel I often do my best writing about the mountain when I'm not on the mountain, because I'm trying to save it. I'm grasping for details because I miss it, and I want it to live on. And so if it's right there in front of me, I might not know to save it. And so it's only when I'm away from the mountain that I do my best writing about it. And I think you should write about places that you've never been. I think that's a wonderful challenge for you. And that what you would do is just think of where you have been, and sort of lean into that, and lend your own experience to an experience that you haven't had. Because I think it's exciting to explore new places in fiction. Thanks so much for your question.
Excellent. Ariel said, through your professional career, what authors have influenced your writing the most?
Alice Munro, by far. I think she's the best that there ever was. And I once drove 15 hours to go meet her for a couple of minutes, which I treasured. I'll treasure that experience my whole life. Toni Morrison, Kazuo Ishiguro, John Steinbeck, Robert Frost. I mean, I could go on and on, but those are, Marilyn Robinson. I almost forgot to even mention her. She's one of my greatest influences, and was, one of my professors at Iowa. The first time I read her novel Housekeeping, which takes place in Idaho, in northern Idaho, not far from where my novel takes place, I was amazed at what language could do. I'd never known that language could achieve what I was seeing on the page. And so if you haven't read Housekeeping, you've got to. Thanks for your question.
Okay, Mari said, first of all, thank you for reading. She said, Idaho balances such a heartbreaking tone between darkness and hope. In your opinion, do you see darkness in literature as a necessity to describe the human experience? And how do you determine such a beautiful balance between horror and light?
That's a great question. I wrote this when I first started to write this novel. I didn't choose, I'm going to write a story about a mother who kills her daughter. That wasn't like an intellectual choice that I made. I think that would be kind of a odd thing to choose to write about. It was more, I was in the mountains with my family. One day we lived in the mountains, but we went to a different mountain to get firewood, just like the family does here. And it was so far removed from society. It was just so far away. And we stepped out of the truck, and I just remember this feeling of grief emanating up from the ground. I'd never felt something like that before. It was as if we had stepped into a space where something horrible had happened, and that nobody knew about it except the earth. It was like the earth remembered this thing. And I didn't know what the thing was, but I was really distraught by it. My mom says it was kind of like I was in a sort of a trance as I gathered wood with my parents, because I felt I had entered a memory that wasn't mine. And so over the course of writing the novel, it was trying to discover what this darkness was. And I'm not interested in just darkness. I would have stopped writing this novel if I wasn't writing toward light. I wanted to explore kindness and forgiveness and love in the deepest way that I could. And the way that I did that was because by writing about people who had had all of those things taken away from them, and people that they were the least likely people to find love and happiness and joy again. They'd lost everything. And so if Jenny, who's in, prison for murder, and she's, just devastated by what she's done, and she can't even explain how this happened to her, if she can find friendship again, then that's the most hopeful thing I can think of. And what are the rest of us capable of? And so I think in fiction, this balance between darkness and light is just crucial. That doesn't mean I think that all amazing novels have to have an element of horror in them at all. There are many beautiful, like Housekeeping. There's darkness in it, certainly. There's tragedy, unthinkable tragedies, but most of the present story is just very quiet, and it's still like speaks profoundly to humanity. But I think that there's darkness and there's light in all of us, and that was the way that I chose to explore the light, was through darkness, through this starting point of despair, and then just trying to write my way to a place of hope and beauty, because that's what I hope readers come away with is a sense of hope and dignity, and that all of this meant something, even as it was meaningless when it happened, even as it's like an unthinkable loss. There is some beauty and light that happened because of it. If you've lost everything and then you find love, that love might not be as deep or as beautiful as if you hadn't lost it all.
Thank you.
Sure.
Erica said, can you walk us through the process of drafting, submitting, and publishing your short story, Owl?
Oh, sure. Owl took a long time for me to write. I had a very difficult time entering the point of view. For those of you who haven't read it, it's from a point of view of a trapper in the 1800s, a male voice. And it was, I wrote the story several times, and I just never believed that this man from the 1800s. I just had a very hard time finding him inside myself and making his voice real. So I would set it aside, go back to it, set it aside, and then I just changed I changed it to first person, and that changed the rhythm for me, and I was able to just find him very suddenly inside myself. And so that's the draft that eventually got published. And my agent submitted it to One Story, and I worked with Hannah Tinty on editing it, and they were extensive edits. She was a fantastic editor, so there was a lot of cuts and a lot of movement, and she had not felt that the ending was clear, and I agreed the ending wasn't clear, but I didn't want to be too clear because there were things that my narrator didn't know. And so it was a fine balance. How do you reveal something to the readers that your narrator doesn't really quite know himself? And so that a lot of that was discovered through the editing process. And then yeah, so I just took her advice, and we went back and forth for a long time, and I gave it to other friends and colleagues whose opinions I trusted, and my parents to read. They're usually my first readers, and my husband. And yeah, it was just long process, much like any submission to a literary magazine.
Excellent, thank you. Our last question is from Dallin. He said, what was the biggest challenge in writing this novel?
There were, technical challenges, the structure of many different voices across, 70-year spans, and where those chapters go, and just how to tell a story about a murder when you don't want to actually go to the murder. I never write from the point of view of anyone who was there. I mean, I write from their points of view, but not while they're there. And so those were technical challenges, but the emotional challenges of it were also significant. There are parts I can't read out loud to this day because they are so sad. Sometimes I can't even talk about it. I spent many years of my life inside of this world where these little girls that I just love, they are taken away from me and from readers and from their family, and they are gone forever. And it's, it was a dark thing to be in every day. Even as I was writing out of like love for them, and I also found great joy in writing about them. But once the book was published, I missed them so much, because it was I didn't get to be with them every day. I didn't get to change them. The world became finite. It was in a book. You could just see it, and that's where their lives are in this book. And it wasn't until I had readers interacting with me, just or reviewing, or just when I would hear from readers that the book became alive to me again. And I realized just what a gift it was to be able to talk about excuse me, to be able to talk about these characters with other people, and that and in that way they're now in the world. They're not just in my head. And that was a really beautiful experience.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again. I wish you could see the faces and hear the praises from those in attendance, but that was a wonderful reading, and we're so grateful you could be with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for listening and for your wonderful questions. And if you have more questions, you can always email me, just my first and last name @gmail.com. I'm happy to answer questions.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you all for joining the reading series this week. Don't forget to visit the link in the chat window for the novel Idaho. And also, please remember next week, same time, for the Paxman student reading. See you then.
Thank you.